For more years than I want to admit, I was married to a monk, a 12th century French monk, Abbot Suger. You see him pictured on that stained glass window, a stained glass window of a stained glass window. He's making a presentation of a church that he built, and I finally left him for a political poster. I was avoiding the dissertation, taking a walk on the beach, ran into a friend who said, "You've got nothing better to do. I'm working on a fundraiser for the Nicaraguan Literacy Crusade, and why don't you make a poster for it?" My first thought was, this guy doesn't know the difference between an artist and an art historian. An artist I was not. But my second thought was, oh, another excuse not to work on the dissertation. So I said, okay, this is interesting. I'd never made a political poster before, didn't really know what that was all about, but let me try. I did a lot of research about the Nicaraguan Revolution, learned that the man named Sandino, whom you see pictured, was a revolutionary leader from the 30s. He was assassinated and the US put in a brutal dictatorship that lasted from the 30s till 1979 when it was overthrown by the Sandinistas, taking their name from Sandino. And they had a country that was literally 56% illiterate. And so they used posters and a lot of volunteers to help teach people to read and write. After the poster was done, I actually had a small insight. And the insight was, as I'm looking at this poster, had my name on it, I said, if 10 people read the poem on this poster, there's probably 5 more than would read the dissertation. So that was, just a little insight about, relative audiences and relative import. Then 2 years later, in 1981, I was hired to help UCLA professor David Kunzel, who was an avid poster collector. He understood their importance in terms of both art and political documentation. And we went down to Nicaragua to collect posters for him. And this was really a paid vacation. I would have taken a free trip anywhere. But it was great that this was at least the country that I knew something about. My husband and I spent hours going to different, both government and non-government organizations, meeting people. It was really fun, and learning about the revolution and how they were using posters. They would use, because this was an illiterate, 56% illiteracy, they would show in posters, women should wash their hands, men should wash their hands before feeding the baby. Or get rid of the tires that are collecting water so malaria doesn't spread. So they were using posters for things that we take for granted. Then one day I went to the women's organization, and they had a big demonstration planned for a couple of days later about women's rights. And instead of giving me 1 or 2 posters like I was normally given, they gave me a pile. So I knew what to do with a few. I didn't know what to do with a pile. So I was regifting them. I was giving them to other people. And one of them I gave to the woman whose house we were staying in. And she put it on her living room wall. A few days later, one of her neighbor's children, 8 or 9-year-old boy, had never been in their house before. And he comes in, and immediately, kids are curious. They explore, look around, see how these people live different than they do. And he immediately is drawn to the poster. And I saw him go over to the poster and mouth the words. In English, it would be, in constructing the new country, we are becoming the new woman. And I saw him trying to figure it out. And I have no idea if he ever figured it out. He probably didn't. But that was my epiphany moment. That was when the light bulb literally exploded in my head. Because that was the moment I understood how posters work. You're going about your daily life. You're not making a special trip to a museum or someplace. You're going about your daily life, and all of a sudden, something catches your eye by its bright color, its bold graphic, and those two things together work to call your attention to the message. And the message then pulls you in and makes you ask a question, or it tells you something you didn't know, or makes you question something you thought you knew. And the very act of asking a question changes you. You're not the same person before you ask the question that you were after. And that literally, that moment of seeing that child changed me. And at that moment, I became obsessed with collecting political posters. And if the Nicaraguans could use them to teach and educate and inspire their community, why couldn't we do the same thing in the United States? Now, posters, this is a good example of a poster that challenges people's preconceptions. This is by Josh McPhee, done in 2004 around the Iraq War. And it's a list of places the US has bombed since World War II. And this was the first exhibit at one of the anti-war shows I did, and people would walk into the exhibit, see this exhibit, and say, that can't be right. It's way too many. It can't be accurate. And I would say, you're right, it's not accurate. There's missing some. And so what people assume is the history is not necessarily the history. And the posters are showing a very different side. In understanding posters, what's important is not only the artists and their skills, but who the intended audience is. So in this poster done in Chicago in the 1980s, and it's about the genocide that was going on in Guatemala, the focus is on the victim, the helpless mother, the poor child clinging to her back. And it's really aimed at a US audience, getting them to feel empathy and feeling bad for all these victims. What can we do to help stop this genocide? Compare that image with an image made by Guatemalans showing them fighting, showing them empowered, showing political prisoners and prison union activists who are breaking out of jail. And the bird is the quetzal. It's the national bird of Guatemala, so this is the symbol of the Guatemalan people. And this is not a poster focusing on victim. This is a poster focusing on empowerment. And so the audience is very different. And then the image, therefore, is very different. This is one of my favorite posters from the Vietnam War era. And it's showing, the Statue of Liberty, the symbol of the United States, being shoved by Uncle Sam down the throat of a Vietnamese. And it's in a lot of books. I'm not the only one who considers this a fabulous poster. It's by Tommy Ungerer, 1967. And then a few years ago, I learned that the Vietnamese hate this poster. Then I realized it's because it shows them as victims. It shows them as just passively allowing the Statue of Liberty shoved down their throat, when historical reality was they valiantly fought back and actually won. This is one of the most, I'd be surprised if anyone here has not seen this poster. It was first done in 1917 for the First World War, and it was such a successful recruiting poster. I mean, we're talking about posters stopping a war. Posters certainly promote wars, they recruit for wars, they help get people excited about wars, so they certainly can do the work to stop a war. And this poster is still used to recruit today. They haven't found anything better. This is still the most successful, Montgomery flag. But the same image has also been appropriated by anti-war activists to oppose the war. Another Vietnam War poster, I Want Out, by Larry Dunst and Steve Horn and the Committee to Unsell the War. The same image was then used for the Gulf War, but again, more appropriated. And this was by Stephen Kroeninger in 1991, and read the text. Uncle George wants you to forget failing banks, education, drugs, AIDS, poor health care, unemployment, crime, racism, corruption, and have a good war. If you open today's LA Times and New York Times, you could read every one of those things that are listed are in today's paper. We have image overload now. Every place we look, there's billboards. People have billboards on their clothes, walking around with ads. Bus benches. There's billboards and images everywhere. So poster artists really have to break through this image overload. And this is a good example of how they do it. They take a familiar image, Michelangelo's Pietà, and just added simple words. War's good business, invest your son. The next one, also using the Pietà. Now this was from the Iraq War, done by Lester Doré from Madison, Wisconsin. But now he's changed it even more. He's taken the Virgin Mary into a skeletal Muslim woman in a chador with her skeletal son on her lap, and the oil wells in the back located in Iraq. But the single phrase, both in Arabic and in English, says, never again. Now, never again is what the Soviet general who liberated Auschwitz said when he saw the horror of Auschwitz. So in this one image, we have combined Christian, Islamic, and Jewish cries for peace. 2 words, 1 image. This poster is also the one I brought up, and it was the most widely distributed poster of the Vietnam War. It was made in the mid-60s by Lorraine Schneider, a graphic designer in Beverly Hills, and then it became the logo for an anti-war organization called Another Mother for Peace. And it's a very simple, beautiful design. It was actually rejected from an art school, from a university art school back east, because it was too simplistic. But so much for art schools, it became literally the most widely distributed and reproduced poster of the Vietnam War. And this is something that actually I had in my daughter's room. It was that easy to live with. I would not put a picture of the horrors of war, but of a peaceful image of war, it was a perfect image to raise a child. Now, I'm now going to show you some images that changed Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. Art is powerful, and art, poetry, theater, music, posters. The civil rights movement, we cannot imagine without the music. We shall overcome, we shall not be moved. It was central to inspiring and creating the community and empowering the community to make the change that was needed. Martin Luther King did not approve of the war in Vietnam. He wanted to stop the war, but his advisors told him, stay off of that subject. Stick to domestic issues, do not deal with international issues. And he went along with them. Until in January 1967, he was taking a sabbatical. He was at the airport. He was pulling some magazines to read on the plane. And one of the magazines he pulled off was Ramparts magazine that had a photo essay of the effect of the war in Vietnam on children. And he's having lunch with a friend, and he's flipping through the magazine at the same time, and all of a sudden, King pushes his food away. And the friend says, something wrong with your lunch? And King says, nothing will taste good again until this war has stopped. And I want to share with you some of the images that he saw. So on the left, you see on the left side, there's a child with his face literally dissolved by napalm, and next to it was a poster made out of that photograph. On the left, you see another photo from the magazine of a child without an arm, and on the right, you see a poster that says, I can neither hold a gun nor a dove with my hand. Now, you've heard the expression, if it bleeds, it leads, and the newspapers and the television, they'll have an outrageous image, and then it'll be pushed out of people's memory and replaced by another outrageous image. What posters do, they'll take an image like these, by making it into a poster, it stays in people's consciousness. It stays in people's minds. They can't just forget it and replace it by the next image that comes by. And one of the most horrific images is of the My Lai massacre. This was a massacre that took place in March of 1968. US military troops, Charlie Company, massacred more than 500 unarmed civilians, mainly women and children. And it was kept secret from the American people for over a year and a half, until the photograph by a private photographer who was traveling with the Army, embedded, gave his private photograph over because he was interviewed by Seymour Hersh, independent journalist. Seymour Hersh broke the story, and one of the soldiers was being interviewed on Mike Wallace's television program. And you see it's called Q and Babies, because Mike Wallace asked the question, and babies? And the soldier answered, and babies. And the New York Times printed the Q&A, just as you see it on the poster, and the Artworkers Coalition in New York photographed the type font, blew it up, and put it on the image. That was all you needed for that poster, because everyone at the time, now I have to give the history of it, but at the time, everyone knew what it was about. And 50,000 copies of this poster were distributed, and did not let people forget that this was being done in our name and with our tax dollars. And this was a poster that helped change the opinion of the American people against the war. A similar thing happened when this photograph was made public. Seymour Hersh also unveiled or revealed the torture at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. And this, of the many horrific images, this was probably the most horrific and the most iconic, because it really was very Christ-like, very crucifixion-like. So this one is appropriating the Got Milk commercial, but making it Got Democracy instead. The San Francisco artist Robert Anderson and his cousin Zach. This one was appropriation of the iPod ad that was really popular, came out in 2004. And what's fascinating about this ad is that a New York artist named pseudonym Copper Green and an LA artist pseudonym Forkscrew Graphics both were afraid of getting sued by Apple, even though this was public domain, free speech, completely legal. They both took pseudonyms. And this was, this iconic image of the silhouette from the iPod, but the Abu Ghraib image. In New York, it was put into the posters, the real iPod posters that were the subway entrances, and you had the Abu Ghraib one smack in the middle. So when people are walking by, they would do a, what? a double take. The first time I saw it in LA, the same thing, the real ad put into with a political poster in the middle of it, I did a double take. And it kind of like perfect culture jamming. It gets in your head. It's like a slogan or a commercial song. Once it's in your head, you can't get it out. You could not see that real ad without thinking, is that the real one? Looking at it again, or is that the political one? This is a poster produced by the CIA. So it's not only the anti-war movement that produces political posters. Most governments in the world have really put in a lot of effort into posters. The design was done by Tomasz Zarnecki. He was a 21-year-old art student in Poland. It was taken without his permission, without asking him, by a member of Polish Solidarity. It was printed in Rome. Then the CIA had it airlifted in the middle of the night, literally the night before they were going to vote for the Communist Party or Polish Solidarity. I met the artist, and he told me he was going to church with his parents, and he walks to the square where the election was, and all of a sudden, he almost fainted, because there were hundreds of his poster that he hadn't seen in months, plastering the walls. This act of creativity so inspired the Polish population that they came out in droves and voted, and they voted the Communist Party out. 10 years later, Polish magazine, the version of Time magazine in Poland, literally put this poster on their cover, and they called it the poster that changed Polish history. Now here's a poster that changed US history. Because this Shepard Fairey poster that he did in 2008 for Obama's campaign, I really believe helped convince people that Obama should be elected president. It really encompassed the hope that we all needed, that we wanted. But not only did this poster help change US history, but it also changed graphic design history, because the graphics that Shepard Fairey developed for this poster then started appearing in posters all over the world. The Arab Spring was producing posters using the same aesthetic. And this one, I think it's ironic that this one with Edward Snowden, who's Obama's calling a traitor, should be actually using the same aesthetic that the Obama hope was. And I just want to end with this poster. It's an Italian poster. The artist is named Massimiliano, done in 2006. And it says, "The most dangerous burqa is the one we don't know we're wearing." And I thank you.